We are back on Morning Line. Thanks for joining us. Nick Barris along with Davidson County Sheriff Darren Hall. Don't want to get too political with you here, but I'm going to ask you a question. But before I get to that, she waited through the break. I apologize for this. Let's take Sabrina real quick. Sabrina, good morning.
Good morning.
Hey, Sabrina.
Hi. I have a question. It seems like the last few years, the legislators have primarily been focusing on guns and getting more guns in places and into more hands and everything. And I was just wondering, how do law enforcement people feel about that? It seems like it would make their jobs harder.
Yeah.
Wow.
Kind of depends on who you talk to. And most of the time, law enforcement, I think, is supportive of certain controls on certain weapons, for sure. But every once in a while, you hear a sheriff saying, you know, oh, I think more guns the better. And it all depends on how it's regulated, I suppose. I
think Sabrina's right on. And again, I surely can't speak for everybody, right. but I'll tell you, I've yet to hear a law enforcement person support guns and bars. I mean, there may be one. I haven't heard of them.
Okay.
But I think the balance that you're hearing so much about is a lot of law enforcement people are really active with their own weapons away from work, and so I think they would argue that the Second Amendment is important, and you got to make sure all that's part of it. So I think, but when you're talking about doing their job, I was with someone over the weekend or somewhere in the last few days, and I just remember this conversation. It was a high school friend of mine I hadn't seen forever, and he was just saying, I can't imagine being in law enforcement today. He said, what percentage of cars do you think you pull over has a gun in it?
Oh boy, yeah.
And I said, you know what? I think you have to assume every vehicle has a gun in it. I said, when we were in high school, he and I, which was a long time ago, that would have been the news story. Someone was pulled over for DUI and there was a gun in the car. I mean, that would have been. Well, now you literally must assume that that's just the way it is.
Yeah, these are people with guns in the car legally.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Yeah,
and they have a right to do that.
Right. But back then, all of that would have been much different. And I think the weapon in the vehicle, legal or illegal, was an alert, if you will. Now it's almost both legal and a lot of times. But Sabrina's right. We spent a lot of time talking about where to allow guns. And there's been very little to do to talk about what can we do, not necessarily about the gun problem, but about the problem in general. And I think that's what's lost. I mean, whether it's the mass shootings or whether it's the other situations, and I'm not here to say the guns are the problem or not, I'm just saying we spend a lot of time talking about letting guns go in the legislature, I mean, in the building, and in bars and in parks. But very few people have talked about whether you allow them or not, what are we going to do about the fact that a lot of people are being, harmed with guns, and that doesn't mean you should take them away from them, but who has them and how did they get them and what can we do about it, and wherever you allow them to be, it's just we spend a lot of energy sometimes in the wrong direction, and I'm not opposed to people having weapons. I'm just concerned that, I say this every time, but most shootings, mass shootings you see, people focus on the gun issue, and it may be a case, it may not. 98% of the time, I suspect there's a mental illness involved. I mean, you just look at it. Or terrorism, and I'm taking the terrorist case out of it. We had the shooting out here at the theater here in Antioch. If you look at around the country, if you really drill down into it, that individual was suffering from some level of mental illness, and most of the time they had contact with law enforcement at some point in their time. If we had done anything about the mental illness when that happened originally, maybe these shootings don't occur. I'm not saying it would. I'm just saying we've done nothing. The gun is an issue, but the reality is the person who had it was suffering from a health issue. It is a mental health problem, and this country has a crisis. And what we do is we focus on the political appeal of guns and taking guns away or giving more guns, and that takes up all the oxygen in the room. No one talks about the fact that we deinstitutionalize the mentally ill, and they're in the streets today, and quite often they're in the criminal justice system. And if you have a chance to do something about it while they're there, maybe we could improve society,
All right, let's go to James. James, good morning.
Good morning.
Hey, James.
Yes, I have a question for the sheriff.
Yes.
We hear so much on the news anymore in reference to gun control, policing for profit, and stuff like that. Why are we not going after the doctors that are prescribing all this medication, causing people to become addicted to drugs? So to me, it's sort of like dispensing for profit.
No, you're right about that. The pill mills and all of that, and they've tried. Now again, that is not under your umbrella necessarily, even though you'll lock them up. But he's right. I mean, I know the police chief and the TBI and others focus on some of these pill mills, is what we'll call them, that you go in with a bogus prescription, or you say my back hurts, and they just write you whatever you want. Those doctors need to be held accountable.
Yeah, the biggest drug dealers in the country, as we used to call drug dealers, like I said a minute ago, 3 out of 4 people who overdose were originally on pain medicine. Well, that means that's not people in the streets shooting heroin. They were taking pills. They ran out of pills because they were addicted to the pills. Yeah. They continued to go until they became addicted to heroin. But he's right, and the reality of it is, I believe Tennessee is one of the top 3 or 4 states in the country per capita of issuing pain medicine. It's a crime. There's no doubt about it. It's a real problem, and there are so many people affected by it. I think you and I were talking off air, but I'm worried about getting. I don't take a lot of aspirin even. I don't take a lot of medicine at all.
Try to stay away from pills.
I just don't like it, and I think ultimately there are people who need it, but the fact is, when your body is dependent on something, and because you're prescribed it or not, you can lose everything, your freedom, of course, your life, and everything else.
Yeah, and good pain management with a good doctor comes from someone who's prescribing, like I had when torn rib cartilage, or when you had your shoulder surgery. You get these pills that you need for that moment, okay? But your doctor should be in close consultation with you. You use it only for a period of time. You don't just run out and write another 30 for the person, and that kind of stuff happens, man. We've done stories on it, just so you know, on this, James. We've done several stories, and they try to crack down on it, but there's so much money to be made. Yeah. These guys writing these scripts and coming through, and the pharmacies try to help on this too. See the same guy coming in for another 30-day supply after only a week, they become suspicious. They turn that script over and they track down the doctor writing these, as they should. Yep. It's just, but pain, managing, it's important. It's a tough one. Let's go to Tony. Hi, Tony.
Good morning, Nick.
Good morning, Tony.
All right, I wanted to ask the very good sheriff a question, Nick, if you'll let him.
Yeah.
Okay, now just seen on the news, I forget what channel it was, a $100 million contract for CCA holding the city and state inmates. And I want to know, that's a lot of taxpayer money. And besides that, again, I'm going to repeat this again. Charles Bass Correctional Complex is available. Both the other one fenced in and the one they got down in the airport. There's 2 facilities right within the same distance of each other available without them trying to force the new Bordeaux on Antioch with the trash stuff. They're putting the inmates out there. The inmates going to clean the building, so why does he keep saying it's just going to be staff?
I don't know what Tony's talking about. I can give you a couple things. I think he's talking about, there was a story last night, or it was last week, but I think it ran over the weekend, about the CCA contract. We have a facility here in the county that is convicted felons. They are state prisoners. The county in 1990 contracted with the state to house those people. And then the county decided to contract with a private company, and it's bid out every 5 years or whatever. So what happens is the state of Tennessee, these are state prisoners, pays for those inmates to be housed. Whoever's running it, in this case it's CCA, it's a competitive bid process. It's a state prison, unlike ours, which are jails. So that prison that we oversee the contract, CCA is awarded that. The state of Tennessee pays the county, and the county pays CCA. It just passes the money right through. So the amount of money it costs to do it, he mentioned $100 million. It's a $20 million contract for 5 years. So there's $100 million. So the state of Tennessee decided and agreed that they could contract with a company like CCA, whoever bids on it, to run the prison. I've been asked this many times over the years, well, why can they do it cheaper than us? Well, first of all, we run jails, they run prisons. There's a totally different cost element and everything else, so you're not apples to apples there. But even if it was apples to apples, and the state of Tennessee would need to answer this, whether the state could do that prison for the same cost that CCA is doing it for, clearly the state believes contracting is the better way, at least in this situation. And so, it's not $100 million that would go back into the taxpayer coffers. What it is $100 million you'd be paying the state of Tennessee to run the prison.
Exactly. One way or the other, it's going to have to be done to incarcerate these folks.
So it's not, but anyway, he was talking about that was a news story, I think, that ran about the contract. The contract is with the state pays the money, they are convicted felons doing time. I think he mentioned the empty facility at the Charles Bass, which is true. Those are state prisons. I don't have anything to do with it. There's an empty building out there that if the state wanted to operate it, he's right, they could take these inmates out there and run that. They decided that wasn't cost effective, I assume, but he probably would need to ask them. But it's, I think it's an interesting thing. I've always thought it's a healthy competition to have private and public competing. I'm not for either one of them taking over. I've seen corrupt government agencies, I've seen corrupt private companies, and so I think we need to be staring at each other, making sure each other do the best we can, and in a competitive process to select it. What was on the news story that was also, I think, newsworthy was that no one bid against CCA. So CCA was the only bidder. Well, when they bid on the contract, they don't know that. Okay. Everyone submits their bids, and then what happens is if there's 4 bids, you compete. Well, if no one else bid, you don't know that when you put your price and your amount in.
Okay, so yeah.
It was implied that they knew there was no one bidding and that they
could get a low cost or a higher cost, charge more rather, or whatever.
That's not possible as far as I could tell. And but anyway, it's a fair question. And but anyway, I'm not sure. Tony was talking about the inmates out in, I think, Antioch and so forth. But I think we're going to do what the city has decided to do, which is to rebuild downtown. He was worried about $100 million. It will end up costing us nearly $200 million probably to build this whole system when it's all over.
It costs money, folks. Everyone wants to lock everyone up. And I'm not saying people don't deserve to be locked up, but so often just lock them up, lock them up, lock them up. That's fine when you say it, but just remember, you're going to be paying for it too. So in my opinion, just lock up the worst and find a way to rehab the rest. We'll take a break. Be back with more right after this.